But that is, what was that? Yeah.
I said, hey, me too.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Something like very important.
Okay.
If not, I have some information to share. If I can't have my time, I'll send it.
All right, sounds good. So, no natural ruler. So, man by nature as a natural ruler. And keep this in mind. The original Declaration, did you know this? Criticized the slave trade. The original Declaration, Thomas Jefferson criticized the slave trade. But there was a reason why that was taken out. It's because of the southern states. Right? They said now is not the time to introduce that. We need everyone to sign off on this. All 13 colonies need to sign off on this. So that was omitted to this draft. And there's something that's essential for us and younger generations to be aware of. There's a difference in equality, right? There's equality before the law and equality of outcome. Right? Equality of the law means we are equal. This is what the founding fathers strive for. We are equal under the law, regardless of what your race is, ethnicity, or religion. The law should be applied to everyone. The Constitution should be applied to everyone equally. Right? Then there's equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is what when my father was living in Afghanistan, the communist government, their belief was, we want to have an equality of outcome. We want to make sure and force everyone to be the same and everyone to be equal. Where the wage of a janitor and a doctor are the same. We don't want anyone to be unequal, but we're going to impose this equality through massive tyranny, through the force of the government. We're going to use guns. So there has to be a difference. And unfortunately, there are those in positions of power and entertainment that are promoting this concept, equality of outcome. And my argument is that is an attack on our foundational principles. Now, there is what's called the New Rome. Oh, one thing I also wanted to mention, the Declaration has a lot of secret type of language as well. So it says, the laws of nature and nature's God. That means God is the legislator. Right? So it says that in the Declaration. The Declaration of Independence says, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. God is the judge. Right? That these united colonies are and right ought to be free and independent states. And then lastly, and it says, and for this support of the Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. God is the protector and the enforcer. So God, what it's saying here is God is the executive, the legislator, and the judge. So power, only God can properly be the judge, right? The powers of the judge, legislature, and executive are in the hands of God. Man does not have that ability. It needs to be dispersed when it comes to government. Does everyone see that? Yeah. And so now, here's what Lincoln says. This is the pictures of silver. This is the U.S. Constitution. If you could read this at least one time per year, that would be great. Make me very happy. And I hope all Americans do that. That would make me very happy. So, here is the New Rome. Our founding fathers created this incredible political project, which was the Constitution. They wanted to form a more perfect union. And so they said, you know what, let's compete with Rome. Rome was the last previous republic that was the superpower. But let's look at history. Our founders, by the way, were Renaissance men, right? They were philosophers. They were Renaissance men. They were statesmen. So they studied history and they said, you know what? There were great features of the Roman Republic. What can we take from the Romans and create the New Rome? Right? So here's one thing is representation. We live in a republic, not a democracy. A republic. Democracy simply means majority rule, right? That's democracy. But the problem is the tyranny of the mob, right? If there's majority rule. So the founding fathers said, you know what? In a big, large country, we need a republic. So we elect representatives to represent our interests on our behalf. So we delegate power to representatives, right? And then we have enumerated powers. Enumerated. That means listed powers. The founding fathers said our federal government should only do what's listed in the Constitution. But guess what? Has that been happening in the past few years? There has been an attack on the Constitution. They've gone beyond the purview. They've gone away from our founding fathers' principles. So that's why some of the flaws that we see in our country today is because we went away from our founding fathers' principles. Our founding fathers said the Constitution gives only, it's a limited government. Our government is limited, and it's only limited to the powers listed. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the powers listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. The rest of the powers that aren't listed here are given to who? The states. Thank you. 10th Amendment. They're reserved to the states. So Article 1, Section 8, it's pretty long. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll just maybe mention 3 of the duties here so you get an idea. So for example, Article 1, Section 8 says the government can borrow money on the credit of the United States to regulate commerce with foreign nations, to establish rule of naturalization, to coin money. So it goes on and on and on, right? So the federal government can only do, according to the founders, those powers or those functions that are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. But the people that have attacked the Constitution said no. The government has plenary powers. So they expanded the scope of government, and that's why we have what's called the administrative state, right, today. The bureaucratic state, or it's called the administrative state, because they said, no, the government has plenary powers. Plenary powers? That means that if there is no law for prohibiting the government from doing something, it can what? It can do it. Yes. If there's no law preventing the government from doing something, it can do it. That goes against our founding fathers' principles of limited government. So that's something I want us to be very aware of when we're analyzing laws and defending our rights. That's enumerated powers. Independent judiciary. So that's a new aspect of our Constitution, where we have independent judiciary. That way, it's appointed by the president, so that way the judges are not swayed by who? The people. If they were directly elected, they may not judge impartially. Then we have extended territory. The founding fathers wanted this country to be spread, extended territory, to prevent majority faction, to prevent factions. So they wanted a larger territory so you can have multiple individuals all across the country and have divergent interests. So that way one group doesn't oppress another group. You also have a bicameral legislature. They have a low public approval rating, but we have a bicameral legislature. That means that we have what? 2 parts of Congress, right? You have the Senate and the what? Yeah. And the House of Representatives. So we have 535 individuals representing us in Washington, D.C. And then another key factor, remember I told you the Declaration of Independence, right? Only God could be the proper judge, jury, executioner, right? But when it's in the hands of man, not so good. Lord Acton said absolute power corrupts what? Absolutely, exactly. So that's why the founding fathers promoted this idea of a separation of powers. You have the executive, the legislative, and what else? The judicial branch. So power is dispersed to prevent tyranny. James Madison said this in Federalist 51. He says, ambition must counteract ambition. That was the goal of the separation of powers. Checks and balances. So we all know the checks and balances. The Congress makes the laws, the president can veto the law, and then Congress can override the president's veto. So there are all these checks and balances. So taking us back to our basic American government class. And then here's key federalism. That means powers are dispersed to the states, and that's in our 10th Amendment. Right? The powers that are, it says the powers that are not specifically enumerated, right, the Constitution of the federal government is reserved to the states. And you have our Bill of Rights. Now, one thing to mention, so the Bill of Rights are basic freedoms, right? The protection of our right to bear arms, the protection of our right, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to be protected from unreasonable search and seizures, cruel and unusual punishment, so the list goes on and on and on. But here's something that we also have to take account of, is that James Madison actually, Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers, actually did not want a Bill of Rights. Did you know that? He didn't want a Bill of Rights. He feared that if rights are listed, then the government's going to say, oh, well, I only protect those other rights, and then I can violate the other rights of the Americans. I can only protect the rights that are listed in the Bill of Rights, but then all the other rights that Americans have, that's free reign for us. So that was Hamilton's fear. So here's what solved that problem. I'm going to read to you the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment took care of that. So, let's see, okay, there you go, perfect. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, so we all know, right, the right to bear arms, the freedom of religion, so the Ninth Amendment solves because we have all kinds of other rights that aren't listed here. So the Ninth Amendment solves that problem. It says, the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others of the other rights retained by the people. So that's something, sometimes some individuals forget that. So just keep that in mind. That's the Ninth Amendment. So we have this great new Rome. And that's why this is the political project of our founding fathers. We have this great country, right, with flaws along the way. No one's going to deny that. We have flaws along the way, but they established this new Rome. That is why we have the longest lasting constitution. Because they understood human nature, and they created a regime that minimized corruption by dispersing power. Does everyone see that? Right? That is my thesis there. And so I want to talk to you about the sin of slavery. So people say, oh, the founding fathers, they were slave owners, they were racist. And there's some truth in terms of them inheriting slaves. But they believe morally that slavery was wrong, and there's actually primary document evidence to show this. This is my counter to those that want to attack America. The founding fathers, I will read this out loud to you, but George Washington in his letter, he wrote, there is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition of slavery. So our founding fathers knew that slavery was a moral issue, and all of them were against it. Most of them were against it. So John Adams says, every measure of prudence therefore ought to be assumed for the eventual total extirpation of slavery in the United States. I have through my whole life held in practice slavery is an abhorrence. So that is our founding father, John Adams. The great Benjamin Franklin. Slavery is such an atrocious debasement of human nature that its very extirpation, if not performed with malicious care, may sometimes be open to a source of serious evils. So that is from Benjamin Franklin. James Madison, he's known as the father of the Constitution. He says that we have seen the mere distinction of color made in the most light period of time a ground of the most oppressive dominion ever exercised by man over man. The most oppressive dominion of man exercised by man over man. So it's clear that the founding fathers, on moral grounds, knew that slavery violated our most sacred principles that all men are created equal, but there were political circumstances that they had to deal with. So the sin of slavery, the circumstances is, at that time of the founding, when they were drafting the Constitution, there were two evils. The first evil was disunion. The second evil was slavery. The founding fathers said, you know what, let's first tackle one evil at a time. Let's first tackle the evil of disunion. They knew that if America was divided, if we didn't have a national U.S. Constitution, it would be chaos. Our enemies in the